Hello my friends, welcome to the next episode of the Gorgeous Gourd drawing. In this episode I'm going to be teaching you how to draw the leaf that's on the left hand side of the largest drawing, and I'm going to be teaching you how to complete the pumpkin that's on the left hand side of the drawing, which will now be referred to as pumpkin number 1. So if you've not watched the videos that come before this one that show you how to shade in the background and how to complete the lines correctly, please make sure that you've watched those first and completed all of those steps before moving on to this video. I will be breaking this down step by step so that you can follow along. When you reach the part of the video that says now pause and try it, you should actually pause the video and try it out while it's fresh in your memory. So now that we've gotten all of our darkest parts of our picture filled in, we're just going to start working from left to right. So we're going to start just filling in the values of things that we see. If at any point you are worried about smearing, I would recommend grabbing just an extra piece of scrap paper to set underneath your hand while you're working so that you can be moving around and not actually smearing what's underneath your hand, and so you don't get that dark gray edge on your hand. So I would recommend you guys work with one of these. However, I would like for you to be able to see the majority of my drawing, so I'll just try to keep my hand lifted. So I'm just going to focus on this area off to the edge, make sure that I've got these little details that are just off to the side. I'm going to try to fill in some of these extra things too that I sort of missed as we were going through before adding these wood textures when we were just focused on the dark values. So I'm just trying to add in any of these light little details, trying to kind of extend out these lines and make them not so perfect. Kind of add some little bumps to a few of them. Now we need to fill in the value for this leaf, which is just a light medium tone. So it's a bit darker on the end. I'm going to add that and then just make this really light going off to the side. So now I'm looking at this image and it's a nice light medium tone. And we've got some of this darker value showing the separation between the veins. So I'm gonna take just one more layer to add in just a few implied lines. Make this a little bit darker and fade out a bit more, a little bit darker of an edge, and maybe a bit darker along the stem. So now I'm gonna blend that out, help those lines be a bit fuzzier. And you are always welcome to go back through and erase more of a highlight if you need one. Now I can go back through and add a couple of these little things that we've got going on in the background. Now this shadow comes down. I'm going to take my blending stump and use that to help make this shadow underneath the leaf. All right, now there's that leaf. So now we're going to get started working on this texture, which is supposed to look like weathered wood. So I'm going to have you take your blending stump and we're going to get started by filling this entire space in. So I'm using the side of the blending stump that I was working with while we were working on the darkest areas. So I'm filling this in just with like a circular texture, and I'm trying to help it get lighter as we fade up towards that end. So we want to have a couple of like rough looking spots. It should not be perfectly smooth, so I left some of that texture showing through. Now I'm going to take my eraser and I'm going to focus on creating lines at the same angle as what's in my image. So I'm starting here and I see that it just goes to a point. Then this next section goes across like this. And I'm just gonna start by erasing like the highlights that I actually see. So I'm trying to focus on making these rows. And I'm just kind of blending across there. So now I'm really starting to erase the whole row as I go. I'm just leaving the value in between. Now from here, I can go through and add a lot more value. Like I see underneath this pumpkin, it's quite a bit darker. And that value is like a nice medium tone that comes down to about here. So I'm going to use my blending stump to kind of blend that out. And now I'm going to go back through and I'm going to kind of rough this up a bit. And I'm using just the side of my blending stump, just add some variations to my lines. And I'm not making this exactly the same as the picture just because that's sort of a lot of texture to go back through and add. So I'm just using a technique that's similar to that texture, and that works. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to add just some very small, and I'm just going to add some lines coming out from here, making sure that that edge blends out since it's kind of got an abrupt edge from dark to light right there. And I'm also going to use my pencil to come back through and add some of these specific textures that I see. So just sort of rough little pencil marks. So I'm just adding these rows in with my pencil. So now I'm just going to take my blending stump, kind of dust over the top of those lines that I added near the top where it's white. Make sure that that goes all the way off to the edge. In fact, this is actually a little bit darker and filled in right here and along here. Just kind of lighten up at random throughout here. All right, so now we're going to get started working on the value from this floating pumpkin. I am going to set this piece of scrap paper here since we're really just focusing on this pumpkin specifically, and that way I'm not smearing the rest of my drawing. I'm going to work with just a darker medium tone, and I'm gonna draw in this little section where the value comes up, and it's just a little bit darker right here. And then it does get a little bit lighter and skinnier. I'm trying to draw this section right here. So I'm going to fill that with my blending stump. And then I'm actually going to erase this dark line. And it's just going to be implied because of the highlight. That shape is right there. Now I'm going to go back through with my blending stump and just kind of smooth this out. I'm going to darken up this little section, and I'm going to add more distinguished lines with my blending stump. Next, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add a darker line. And we're going to focus on leaving this little highlight right here. So I'm really just trying to mimic this shape of shadow and leave the highlight by that edge. We're just going to fade this out to white, and then I'm not actually going to touch that white at all. Now I'm just going to smooth out this medium tone, and I'm actually going to go back through and add just a little bit darker of a line along that edge. Next, we're working on this section. So I'm going to add in this medium tone. And then I'm actually going to use my blending stump to help me fade out from here. We're just going to fill the rest in. And I actually noticed that right here along the base of my stem is where it gets much darker. So I just added that little line right there. Now over here, we've got this darker line for the value, and it kind of goes across the top of the stem. And then I'm going to use my blending stump to fill in the rest of that. So I'm using that blending stump, and I'm switching sides because I actually have more graphite on this side of my blending stump. And this side actually needs to be filled in all the way. Okay, now this side will come up and over. Now this side, same thing. I'm going to add the line of medium value, and then I'm going to use my blending stump to help me bring that up. And then I'm adding this light value that should then fade into the white. Now I'm right here, so I'm going to add in a little bit larger of a dark section that then gets skinnier. Now I'm going to use my blending stump to help me spread that. So it starts off skinny, then it gets a little bit wider right here, and then it's just going to be this nice medium tone all the way through. Now I've got this area that I'm going to darken up just a little bit. I want my pumpkin to stand out up against this edge. So I've got a fairly large highlight here. The value that I'm going to fill in doesn't start until down here. So I'm filling that in nice and light. And I'm going to fade that down to the bottom, blending that out just sort of in a rounded shape. And then the rest, I'm going to use my blending stump to help me fill in. So first I'm going to fill in this section that I did with the medium tone. I'm going to bring it down here, take that section and kind of define the edge a little bit more here. And I notice this is kind of going straight across before it turns into this lighter tone. So going back up here has a highlight that goes all the way to the edge right here, where it's just a little point. And then this should be filled in with our medium tone, or our blending stump, which is sort of a lighter tone. And we've got this tone kind of coming out from the stem. We've got this darker line that's coming in here. And then a bit of a medium shadow that's kind of coming out around this point. So I'm looking right here. So this shadow kind of comes up around that point and around the other side. But the space in here isn't white, it's just a really light value. So now we've got this darker line, which meets this and makes it just sort of a rounded point. So I'm going to start by filling in my medium tone. It's this whole edge. I notice that it comes out and around, and I'm going to help it fade to white. Now for the rest, I'm going to use the blending stump. So again, I'm going to fill in the values on my darker section first. And I'm doing that to help load my blending stump with value so that I have enough to blend out as I'm working my way up. And I'm going to leave this highlight right here, and I'm going to blend this medium or this light tone out. I could probably add another layer of this medium and help it blend out just a little bit more. I really want to make sure that this section right here gets blended out evenly so that it doesn't have just a solid edge or line to it. Now I'm going to work on adding the medium tone just right through here. And I see that it starts to come out. So I'm working on adding the medium tone that I see here, and it starts out pretty skinny, then it gets a little bit thicker, and then it goes back to being fairly thin again. It also goes across the bottom here, and notice that it is darker as like a triangle shape, and then once it reaches this side, it actually is a little bit lighter. So I'm going to use my blending stump to work on the rest of this. So I'm going to first start on my darker part so that I'm loading up my blending stump. Now I'm going to start pressing a little bit lighter to help this fade out. I'm going to work on blending it into this space because this is a very soft edge. And I'm working my way up, and I need to pay attention to where my highlighted space is, so I'm not going into it. I'm just using my finger to make sure that I'm not going into the wrong area. And now I'm just going to use my blending stump to help me blend the rest of this out. And now looking at it, I think I could probably go a little bit darker. So I'm just going to add another layer down here just to work on blending that out a bit. And I'm going to make sure that this value goes all the way to the edge here so that I don't end up with too much of a highlight at the bottom. I left a little bit here at the bottom, but we really don't need a highlight over here. And then the last section we're shading is this one. Right away I see I might need to kind of bring this line out and curve this a little bit more into my other side. So I'm going to lay out my darker value, but I notice it doesn't start until over here. And I see that this is a pretty big contrast to the background, so I'm really using that knowledge to help me figure out how dark this should be. So I actually started out lighter than I was gonna need to, and then realized, oh, it needs to be darker than the background, and that helped me. So I'm using that to just kind of fill in my medium tone. Remember, that's all that I need to fill in, and I can use my blending stump to help me work the rest out. So this section is actually kind of coming up just with value in the middle, and then it's lighter on either side. So now I'm going to take my blending stump and work my darker area first to load my blending stump with graphite. I'm going to slide this over so that I'm not smearing my picture. I'm going to fill this in all the way off to the side. This does start off with value in it as well before it goes off to being light. Just adding in this value to surround that highlight. And then the rest, I'm just going to use my blending stump leftover value to fill in. I'm rotating it around once I start to kind of run out of my value. I can go back down to my darker area to kind of pick up some, or I can add another layer. And the final step is to go through and add the value to the stem. So to do that, I'm going to first start with my blending stump, filling in the basic values in the background. We've got a highlight on the top and on the side, but the rest is going to be filled in with a nice medium tone. And then I'm going to just go through with my pencil and add these textures. So this line goes up against the edge, comes down. So I'm going to put my finger here because I'm sort of losing my spot. So I'm adding this texture to the stem and value. Now I'm going to just add some little dot type textures, a few little lines. And I'm going to come in and add a little bit more value to the shadow to make it a smoother transition. I'm going to add just a little bit of value fading out. So now I'm going to just take a look and see what the biggest things are that I can go through and fix. I notice I can probably darken it up a bit along this bottom edge. And I'll just go through and find lots of little details that I can go back through and add. Thank you so much for watching another episode. I'm looking forward to having you finish this. I know that you guys have been doing a great job, so I'm proud of you. Keep it up and let's keep going. Thanks for watching.